This is Edwin Morgan's Glasgow Sonnet number 1, and the title of it is really important because it gives away a few useful things that we need to know straight away. Glasgow was Morgan's home city, and it was a city that he was very proud of and that he had a huge love for, even though he wasn't blind to its faults. And it was published in 1972 and talks about a reality of Glasgow and how it was in the 1960s and 1970s as industry in the city declined and social neglect and urban decay and poverty became very much characteristics of the city. And these are the characteristics that he wants to communicate as themes in this poem. A sonnet is a particular form of poem which has, as you would see here if you count it all out for yourself, 14 lines, 10 syllables on each line, and a particular rhyme scheme. Now, the way that Morgan's rhyme scheme here works is that it's A, B, A, B, and then that repeats itself again, A, B again, and then you get this C, D, C, D, C, D in the last 6 lines. So the rhyme scheme serves to kind of divide the sonnet up a little bit, and we'll talk as we go through it about where those divisions fall. But it's useful to know that this form of sonnet with that rhyme scheme is known as Petrarchan. And we begin at the very beginning with the words, "A mean wind wanders through the back court trash." And there's a few things going on here. The word choice, mean, suggests that there's kind of cruelty and there's violence, even in the weather, and this personification of the wind wandering through makes it hostile and possibly a little bit purposeless. I almost get the feeling that the wind is kind of looking for trouble. And the word back court identifies where the poem is set, because it identifies the slums and the sort of common areas around the backs of the tenements in 1960s Glasgow. And when he talks about the trash, he's talking about the rubbish that's left lying there, which is a sign of poverty. On the second line, the ripples on the puddles, you would see hackles rising on an angry or defensive dog, but even these ripples that the wind stirs up on the puddles feel hostile. And the mattresses that have been thrown out at the back seem to breathe as the wind inflates them, but they don't have much energy and they quickly give up, as you see in the word subside. Play fortresses of brick and bric-a-brac. Bric-a-brac is a sort of old-fashioned word for things that are kind of broken and unwanted and probably being thrown out. And the children have been using this rubbish, the bricks and the broken bits and pieces, to make a fortress, to build somewhere to play. There's lots going on here. There's a suggestion that they perhaps don't have any other toys. There's the fact that they're creating somewhere that a fortress is all about kind of protection in conflict, building castles, and it's all about the idea that life is a battle. And the bric-a-brac here, you've got these plosive B's and the harsh C sounds and CK sounds. Just give this sort of hostility and harshness to the lines that suggest that it's a battle. These fortresses spill out ash. Ash has connotations of burning, and you'll know it as the ashes to ashes from the funeral service. It has connotations of death. And the whole of these first 4 lines, this first A-B section in the rhyme scheme, create a bleak mood at ground level. At this point we're outside and we're focused on what's happening on the ground. From here though, in the second A-B group, we're looking up at the buildings. And when we look up, there are no windows left in the first 4 floors of this building. And the vandalism has only stopped when the windows are out of reach. They've broken every window they can find to throw things at. They can't reach any higher. And in that vandalism, in those broken windows, we see urban decay and social deprivation again. And then in the 5th, a chipped sill, we've got lots of short I sounds in 5th chipped sill. And the short sounds emphasise that sort of chipped sill. Everything about this place is damaged. But then the word buttresses is kind of ambiguous because it's an architectural word for a support, and it's usually something quite grand. It's the kind of thing you'd find on castles and old churches, and So it's ironic that it's used here, this sort of grand architectural word, to describe this horrid tenement block. And again, a similar use of mistresses, and like buttresses, it sounds grand to be the mistress of somewhere. You're the lady of a castle. And it's incongruous in this setting that this is what these women are mistresses of. So Morgan is using irony to highlight their deprivation, suggesting that they are mistresses. I think they probably are the last family here, though. Everybody else has moved out because of the poverty and destruction of the place. And we hear that this black block has been condemned. That's a word that could be personification, because condemned has connotations of crime and being sentenced. But this block, instead of being condemned to be demolished, has been condemned to stay, and it's almost as though for it to stand is a worse fate than for it to have been knocked down would have been. So it would have perhaps been better to demolish it. And stand is also ambiguous, because as well as the buildings standing, the women are standing, and they're standing at the window, just looking at the desolation around them, and they've got nothing else to do, probably. And again, that speaks of societal neglect and poverty, a sort of purposelessness. And then in these lines you see this alliteration picking up again. You've got these B, L and C sounds, and all the sounds we've got: black, crash, stand, cracks, rats. We've got these hard A vowels and the B, L and C alliteration, and it all sounds like material breaking and cracking. Now we've done 2 of these A-B groups of lines, we reach something called the Volta, which is, in a sonnet, a break between the octet, which is the first 8 lines, and the sestet, which is the last 6, particularly in a Petrarchan sonnet. Shakespeare's were sometimes a bit different. And often when you reach the Volta, as well as seeing a change in the rhyme scheme, you see a shift in perspective. And now we're going to move inside the building, and having had the hint of these 2 women, the mother and the daughter, that are standing at the window, we now move in to look at the setting inside and at where they live. And we get this thing about the cracks deepening. I'm sure it is the building, but I think it could also be relationships in their family, and I think it could be society in general. As industry declined and unemployment rose in Glasgow in the 1960s and 70s, as the prosperity that industry had brought faded, you can see that society has left these people behind and that society is failing. So I think Morgan's use of the cracks deepening is deliberately applicable in a number of different ways. Rats are an emotive sign of decay and deprivation and dirt. And all these things, the cracks in the walls and the rats, are signs of extreme poverty, which is a horrible place for people to live. Even the kettle. The kettle is personified as well, as it whimpers, and the word whimper suggests that it's weak and that it's in pain. And when he talks about the crazy hob, I think, like crazy paving, the hob is probably cracked. But again, Morgan never lets a word do one job if it can do 2, and I think there is a suggestion that this is also representative of mental health. The roses of mould that grow from the ceiling to the wall. We haven't really talked about the fact that a sonnet is usually a love poem, which seems ironic, but this seems like a good point to mention it as well, because roses are a typical symbol of love and romance, which are things that you would normally find in a sonnet. But these roses are made of fungus and mould, and they show that there's decay and damp. And it's ironic that he uses this symbol that you would expect in the symbolism of a sonnet, but he uses it ironically by making it something rather horrid. I think there is a reason why he writes this poem as a sonnet and as a love poem. We'll come to that in a minute. Now we get the reference to the man. The fact that he's given a definite article, the. He's the man. He's possibly the last man in the block. But it's interesting that if he's part of this family, he isn't named as father or husband. He's just named as the man, which I think reinforces what I said earlier about cracks deepening perhaps within the family. All 3 of these people are nameless. But I think that makes them both insignificant in that they don't have names, they're not identified as individuals. But it also makes it universal. It could be anybody, it could be everybody. And he lies late since he lost his job. The alliteration and the monosyllabic line emphasise the hopelessness of this man's situation. He has lost his job. Makes it sound a little bit like it was his fault, which is not Morgan's intention, and again I think that is ironic. We talk about him having lost his job. We don't talk about his job having been taken away from him, which is probably closer to the reality. But those L's are sort of more languorous, long consonants that just slow this line down to this sort of sense of sleepy pointlessness. He doesn't even get out of bed to smoke his cigarette, because what's the point? He's got nothing to do and nowhere to go. And his cough that falls thinly. I love the way that enjambment here takes fall and then it falls on to the next line with thinly. The cough could be from smoking, or it could be from the cold and the damp and the mould. Again, it's ambiguous. Morgan lets us think both things. And then thinly, again, suggests weakness. Even his cough is weak. And finally, the air, too poor to rob. The air will be poor quality. It is damp, it is cold, it's full of mould spores, it's probably full of smoke. We know there's ash blowing around outside. But the air is personified with this transferred epithet. So it's not really the air that's too poor to rob, it's the man. He has nothing left to steal, but by making the air too poor and too thin, Morgan leaves us with this very sad, hopeless final line. So why is this poem a love poem? I think it's because in his anger you can see Morgan's love for Glasgow. You can see that there's an ironic anger about the decay that has been allowed to happen in this city. Because he loves Glasgow and he loves the people and wishes it could be different. So he shows us this reality, perhaps in the hope of change. If you look at the colours I've used for highlighting, anything that's orange is personification, anything that's green talks about word choice. Where there's alliteration, I've tried to pick it out in pink. And there are those 5 lines that you could think about where enjambment takes us from one idea into the next without the line being end-stopped. And I think that is Glasgow Sonnet.